and I'm going to go now. Good luck.
Hello everybody, welcome to Collaborative Northwest and our Christmas special. So for the second time we run the gauntlet of technology, and we're coming to you via Microsoft Teams Live, and it's great to be able to finish the year with this very special educational meeting. So just a plan for our session today. Really big welcome to everybody. I'm going to show you what we're going to do today, and just some kind of housekeeping so you don't forget. If you keep your microphone on mute, that would be great. And then if you use the Q&A button for posing questions as we go through the session today, and then we'll pick the questions up towards the end of the hour, and you'll get a chance to put those questions to the presenters. So just before we start today's session, I was just going to tell you the plans for 2021. So sorry, and today's speakers, we just had a slight technical hitch in the background here. We're starting off with Gwen Waller and Claire Beard from the Warrington Hospital team, and they're going to talk about a new innovation, a new member of the hospital palliative care team. And then, unfortunately, because of all the technical problems that we've had this morning, Helen's not going to be able to join us today. But what we're going to do is move her presentation to the January meeting, so you'll still get a chance to hear it. And then finally, our third keynote speaker is Dr. Karen Groves from Southport, and then we'll do the Q&A at the end. So I just wanted to take a couple of minutes first to introduce you to a couple of special people. And firstly, of course, a huge congratulations to Sinead Benson, who's one of the clinical nurse specialists at the Clatterbridge team, who was shortlisted for the HQIP Audit Hero Awards for 2020. And that was to do with her leadership of the guideline development group on continuous subcutaneous infusions. So a huge congratulations to Sinead, and of course we would all have a round of applause for you if we were in Marie Curie, so we'll do that virtually. And then I'm just going to introduce you to somebody else who you need to get to know over the next year, Dr. Tom Steele.
I think that's me live. So hello from Willowbrook, and thanks Alison and putting up for the technical complexity so I can pop up. So I'm the I say sort of new because technically started a few months ago, but it's only now really getting up and running, trainee audit rep for Collaborative. So many of you remember from pre-COVID times, if we can kind of cast the mind back to that, the SPR rep used to be up there at the meeting presenting. So that was Sarah, and before that Lexi. So thankfully Alison's helping with a kind of a smooth transition by doing the session today, but I'll be on your screens in future meetings in the new year, so I'll see you all in January, and I can pass back to Alison.
So thanks very much, Tom. It's great to have you on board. So just kind of to highlight to people about social media and Collaborative Northwest, you will hopefully be following us on Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, and now YouTube. We have almost 474 people following, and those who know Anthony Thompson will know that he's kind of leading this, and it's very much linked to his Twitter account, Big Bad Doctor. But you do get to hear things fast on the Twitter account, so it's definitely worth looking into that. There is a Facebook page, and we're starting to build up the following on that. And now you have the opportunity to watch these presentations again via our YouTube link, which gets circulated after the event. And I think, you know, much as I'm a bit of a dinosaur, social media, virtual teaching, virtual presentations, it's certainly the way to go. And in the steering group for Collaborative Northwest, we're looking for how we can develop this side of the work. So if you've got ideas or you've got interests or expertise, we'd love to hear from you about what you think we should be doing differently. So just finally from me, the plans for 2021. So obviously our 2020 programme was really impacted by COVID, but we're hoping that we can get back on track next year. And what we plan to do is a launch meeting in January 2021. So those of you who kind of familiar with Collaborative Northwest, this is the meeting where we announce the topics for the next year, so that would be for 2022, and then there's normally group work. So we're going to have to think a little bit cleverly about how we do that January meeting, but I hope that as many of you will be able to join us. We know what the topics are going to be for 2021, but we'll keep that as a surprise for that meeting. And then in March 21, the ascites group, who've been waiting a long time to do their presentation, they're ready to go, and hopefully you'll almost have finished putting your data in for the data collection. Then in May we go to anticonvulsants, and Julie Raj and Lexi McDougall hopefully will be ready to go by then. July we should be having our quality improvement and education special. And then in September next year, a year after we had hoped to run it, maybe, just maybe, we'll be able to meet face to face and have our 25, except it'll be a 26-year celebration. And then finally in December 2021, we start the new programme and the new audits. So we should get back on track by the end of next year, and I hope you're going to be able to join us for that programme, and we look forward to it. So without further chat from me, just want to move on now to the first of our keynote speakers, and a huge welcome to Gwen and Claire from Warrington.
Hello, I'm sorry about the delay. Can you see that's all right, everybody?
Gwen, you shared the application, not the presentation.
And we did so well in rehearsals. I do apologise.
Yay.
Okay, let's go back to the beginning. Okay, so from the beginning, can you all see that, the WHH logo?
Not yet, it's running the end of the slideshow. There we go.
All right, I do apologise. Note to self, put self off mute before sharing. Okay, so I'm just going to move on. So my name's Gwen Waller and I'm Matron for Palliative Care here at Warrington Hospital.
My name's Claire, I'm one of the support workers. My usual role is a therapy assistant and I've been in the palliative team since April.
So Alison approached us to put together a presentation for today about our experiences through this last 12 months through the COVID pandemic, but in particular about the development of a role that was specifically introduced here at Warrington, and that's of the support worker. So that's a picture of the extended team. Anybody that knows the Warrington team will know that it's normally quite a small team, but during the COVID period it certainly grew. As with all palliative care services, we look to the future, how best we can deliver the most effective service, the best care we can for this group of patients.
And much like the graph in front here, there's been a lot of ups and downs. It's been quite a roller coaster ride. So we just wanted to show you really how the role has developed and grown over the months. So at the start of the first wave for myself in my therapy role, the therapy services were being redeployed. A lot of my colleagues and friends were moved on to respiratory roles. This brought with it a lot of uncertainty and worries for myself and also the team. So people that were working on the wards that were normally non-ward or non-patient facing based, doing roles that they were very different to what they would normally do.
So at the very start of the first wave of the pandemic, it was very much a place of preparation, the pending pandemic. And the Trust was rapidly working at how to best prepare. We were discharging patients, we were freeing up beds, we were creating wards that were going to be dedicated to looking after these patients. Well, for us as a team, it was about looking at what we could do to prepare. We were looking at the gaps that were going to be needed to be filled, the families that weren't going to be able to visit, preparation for the wards in terms of the education, preparing wards to be able to deliver the care that was going to be really challenging for this group of patients. We had our first redeployed nurses, well, actually I was told on the 27th of March, it was a Friday. It will stay with me for a long time that day. When I was first told about the staff that were going to be redeployed to this service, and it was the research nurses, the CNSs that normally do the research work here at the Trust, that were going to be the first staff to be redeployed to us.
So I heard of the support role initially from word of mouth from my manager, what I could, and I initially thought, what could I bring to the team, what could I bring to the palliative service? And I think I felt did my goals as a person and also professionally, and kind of my kind of incentive to always think patient-centred, did this match up to the work and the skills needed for the palliative team?
So for me though, and the team, it was very much an episode or a period of managing expectations, not only for the core team, but also for the redeployed staff as well. It was very much a management of change.
So some of my initial fears and concerns were managed after attending 2 training sessions, one by Gwen herself and also Jude.
So the face-to-face sessions that we delivered were really useful. It was really useful to be able to have sort of open and honest conversations with this group of staff that were going to be working with us, but also to be able to explore with them what they could bring. But also it was a way of me sort of formulating what this role was actually going to look like, how this was going to work. The research nurses, which I've already said were the first wave of staff that came to us, were really did lay the foundations down. So they really did put the skeleton, the bones in place as to how this was going to look.
So the research nurses became almost like our mentors, but we was quickly able to utilise our own skills and put meat on the bones of the role.
The research nurses really did forge the way for the subsequent staff, but also they helped with the admin roles and the clerical side of our work, which meant that it freed up a lot of our time to be patient facing. But they quickly were able to take on skills in terms of managing palliative and end-of-life care, to the point that they were able to identify perhaps patients that it wasn't right, that more input could be had, that they were very much our eyes and ears.
So the support worker role came from varied roles, including physio, OT, clinical educators and sexual health nurses. So from their support and guidance, I didn't feel like it was a advantage not being from a nursing background.
So to date, we've had over 20 staff redeployed to us through this period of time.
So although the graph only shows data up to July, we think it clearly demonstrates the fluctuation in staff. At times this has been quite challenging, particularly for myself, being a lower band of staff that became a senior in this role to help other redeployed staff.
We had staff complete pre and post questionnaires, and these are a few of the comments that the post questionnaire forms comments that were made on it.
So I've not done one of these feedback forms yet because I've not actually left. So this is a slide just to kind of let you know about my experience really. So the diagram shows the definition of holistic and whole person care. I think the red circle highlights the area where I feel I was able to have the biggest impact on our palliative patients, especially how patients have seemed to almost be grouped together into this sort of COVID positive or COVID negative kind of patient group. I think the act of emphasising someone's identity, personality and individualism of each person is what gives me the most job satisfaction. Helps me grow in confidence and keeps me motivated, learning more skills along the way. I have established relationships and collaborated with professions I wouldn't normally communicate with, such as doctors and consultants. I feel lucky to be within a team that has allowed me to grow personally and professionally, to be allowed the freedom to think outside the box with little restrictions and giving me the trust to work autonomously. My non-medical care of a patient is seen to have an equal positive impact on patients, as such does pharmacological interventions. In this team, my banding and the fact I'm unqualified member of staff has no bearing on the respect shown to me. I feel part of a bigger team making a difference. The job lined up with my personal values and ethics, and to go home and feel like I have made a beneficial impact on a patient and their families' day meant. And not many people, I feel, can say this. Here are a few examples of things that I have done to carry out a person-centred approach to the patient's hospital experience. So top left is showing a step-by-step guide on what I made for a patient who was suffering from short-term memory loss, who had sadly had a brain tumour. This was so that he could continue being privately independent and ring his wife. The bottom left is I utilised the WHH charity here at the hospital and provided an M&S 90 for a lady whose wish it was to not die in a hospital gown. So the top right is Beard's Books, is a borrowed book club where I'm hoping it's with infection control that will allow me hopefully to kind of do like a book swap. And the bottom right is I collaborated with other professionals and that of my own team in orthopaedics to fulfil a patient's dream of being able to sit out into a chair and wheeled him outside to see his dog Molly. So I think it's important to say that although at times it has been extremely sad and difficult, some of the situations, I don't take this as a negative because I can go home knowing that I have made a difference. So in the build up to the second wave, I felt like that was probably the most difficult time for me and it became quite overwhelming. This was because I was the only support worker for a short period of time, and at this time everyone else had returned back to the normal roles. So
the second wave was really quite challenging for us. it was very much a period where, as a trust, it was business as usual, and other services were continuing. But most, or apart with the exception of Claire, the support workers had gone back to their substantive roles. But it was clear that we were going to need more help. So we have a WhatsApp group for the support workers, and I put it out on there that this was the situation that we're in. And the response was absolutely fantastic. The staff contacted me and offered days that they could work in addition to their substantive role. They've done overtime, and we've been able to accommodate the needs alongside business as usual.
So when some of the support workers returned, I felt like we was a lot calmer than the first wave. I think this is a lot because we felt like we got it right the first time. And this was despite the number of COVID positive patients were higher than the initial first wave. And also we had developed friendships and camaraderie. So this is just some of the challenges that we've come up against in this job role. So I think as if we're going to look at the strengths, we proved that we are a good team, the palliative team, and we had each other's backs and supported each other. The skill mix, although initially it was, it was hard to kind of pick out each person's skill, and not being from a palliative background, I felt turned into a strength as we could contribute in other areas of patients' care, such as physio.
So one of the weaknesses I think that we felt as a team was that other professionals from outside the team had their expectations and their ideas of what this role would look like, and that was quite challenging at times. That there was an expectation out there that this was a bit of a hand-holding service, which it definitely isn't. It's definitely more than that.
So if we was to look at the threats, I think one of the biggest hurdles for me has been kind of the restrictions in place professionally. I think sometimes it's quite difficult liaising with nursing staff if I felt like maybe that a patient may need some anticipatory medications, and kind of me being within my banding and background, not being nursing based, it's kind of always a little bit difficult. And I think there's a perception that people think that this job is easy, as Gwen just mentioned, kind of a hand-holding job, but it is actually much more than that.
And finally, the opportunities. Well, I can't imagine a future without keeping this role within the team. It's definitely been a test for change. We'd always, as a team, talked about how we can expand the team, and whether or not there was a potential for a role that was a non-qualified. But this has definitely been a way of demonstrating that it's absolutely valuable. So where we are in the future, well, we are looking at the business case to expand the team. That's in the process. The job description for the role of support worker has been written and has gone to job matching. That's been approved. So hopefully the next stage will be that we're going out to adverts.
So give us a job, Gwen. So throughout this presentation, we haven't really described what the role entails, but it's kind of everything and anything really, depending on the patient's needs, which I think makes it so unique in a job role. So there is no script for my day, and no 2 days are the same.
So I'm just going to read some of the words from one of the other support workers that has since gone back to her substantive role, to give you a flavour of how best describes this piece of work that's been done. So this is quite a challenging piece to read, so bear with me. So this is some thoughts of palliative care worker. So P is a patient that I have met several times. He is a hospital because he has cancer. P is dying and is aware that at best he has only weeks to live. P was admitted to the hospital as an emergency during the COVID-19 restrictions. This resulted in him having no personal belongings and his family not being able to visit him in the hospital and bring them for him. He has 2 sons and grandson who he normally lives with. He is desperate to get back home and he can spend some time with them before he dies. When I first visited P, he was initially quite shy, and he didn't like to ask me for anything. Once he understood my role a little better, he became more confident and opened up to me about the things that really mattered to him and what kind of things things could help him feel more comfortable. During the time I visited P, I was able to obtain some reading glasses for him, puzzle books and writing materials. I arranged to have his TV fixed and made trips to the hospital shop for newspapers for him. It was extremely satisfying to see him wearing his glasses to read and write and keep himself occupied doing the Sudoku. P was looking very cheerful on one visit. He had told me that he would be going home later that day to his sons and grandson. It was disappointing to find the following day that he was still on the ward. As I approached, I could see the distress in his face. P was unsure what the delay was. He didn't know if it was medical, to do with equipment, or his ongoing care at home. With P's permission, I asked the ward sister to speak with P and myself. We were able to clarify exactly what the delay was. It was actually around his ongoing care at home. P was no nearer to getting home at this point, but so much comforted for knowing exactly what the issue was. A quick call to discharge planning helped to move things along. P's expression of gratitude for the small, simple things I was able to do to help him will stay with me. P is just one example of so many situations where I found myself useful, appreciated, and actually doing something worthwhile. On one occasion, I had sat with a lady who was in the final hours of life. Her family, due to COVID-19, had to make the agonising decision on whether to visit their mum as she died, and then have to self-isolate for 14 days, or not to come into the hospital to shield their family members from the virus. They choose not to visit. However, myself, along with ward staff, were able to offer them a Skype call to their mum. I think this was probably one of the hardest things I have ever done. As I sat holding Mum's hand as she became close to death, I was able to explain on the video call who I was and that I had been there at their mum's bedside all day, reassuring the patient and the family that she was not alone and was cared for. The family were able to say goodbye to their mum, such a personal moment for them. I feel ashamed that I can no longer recall how many people I have been with as they died. However, I do feel honoured that I have been allowed to be there, providing regular oral care and, when needed, or a cool compress for their brow, comforting them, holding their hand, letting them know that they are not alone, that they are safe and are being looked after. C, a lovely gentleman, is in the last days of his life. He desperately wants to finish a cup of tea, but he is struggling with exhaustion. I sat with C, assisting him with the cup, and although it took him over 30 minutes to finish it, all was so appreciative for this small act of patience. B, an elderly gentleman who had dementia and had had a previous stroke. However, he had a wonderful wife and supporting family. Prior to this hospital admission, he had been able to enjoy a fulfilling life. B contracted COVID-19 and was dying. This is another situation where the family had to make the agonising decision on whether or not to visit or shield. Throughout the day that B died, I stayed at his bedside and held a telephone to his ear so his family could talk to him. Without any doubt, B was aware of their voices. I was able to keep the family updated on how B was doing and also describe the situation around the bedside and within the ward. B's daughter told me later how much the family appreciated this information. It was at the peak of the pandemic. It was stiflingly hot outdoors, and the press coverage of the pandemic, particularly the global situation within hospitals, was alarming and distressing. I reassured these families how well managed the hospital was, cool and calm. No shortage of staff or equipment. The bed space where B was situated was quiet, and I was able to remain there with him throughout my shift. Furthermore, there was support from a superb team of ward staff. I could not help but think of my own family and how I might feel if I had to be in their situation. Time is the essence of being a support care worker for palliative care. Having time to do what is often small and simple things can make such a huge difference to a person. It can make a person feel like they are an individual and that they really do matter. So often on the wards of a hospital, wonderfully talented caring doctors, nurses and support staff look after patients, but one thing they are often too short of is time. Being able to give a dying patient and their family your time can make such a difference. I expect I will soon find myself back in my usual role as a specialist MSK physiotherapist in outpatients, with full clinics and constant time pressures facing me. I will without doubt look back at my time as a palliative care support worker during the COVID-19 pandemic as one of an honour and privilege. My report is just a very small example of a situation when I was able to support patients and their families at the most difficult of times, and I'm only one of an amazing team of support workers. All of us redeployed during the pandemic. I sincerely hope that the role of the palliative care support worker is allowed to continue and develop. So you might well be thinking, well, so what? It's difficult to measure the quality of the care that has been delivered. We have got some statistics there that you can see from the quantity of the care, but the feedback from the patients and the families has been absolutely overwhelming. The positivity has been truly fantastic. Now I know that we've already established that there's not going to be any questions throughout the presentation, and that any questions to put into the chat feed that Alison will review. But next presentation is by the brilliant Karen Groves.
Are we on? Are we on? Can you see that?
Paul, it's not letting me put Karen up.
We can see you, Karen.
Ah,
There we go.
are we there?
Yeah.
Yes, you're
Okay.
there.
Okay. So thank you very much to Gwen and Claire for a very moving and very interesting talk. How diverse have we all been during COVID? And I think that just shows exactly what I'm about to try and say. So this pandemic hit locally, obviously, in March 2020, and our response was to deal with both the government guidance and the anticipated impact of the disease on the patients already known to specialist palliative care services, and the anticipated increase in symptomatic end-of-life care that might be needed. So a consistent response across all healthcare settings was required, but we also needed to be individualised to the needs and experience of each setting. And as an integrated service, we were trying to bridge across all of those. So initially, it was that timely development of symptom control and other guidance locally, and reorganising supportive and specialist palliative care services and support of frontline services in each setting. All the volunteers without whom Queen's Court could not normally function were stepped down at the beginning of the pandemic to reduce footfall in the building and to respect their need for shielding, as many of them were over 70, or self-isolating and reducing personal risk. And those duties were undertaken by members of staff whose usual role was no longer possible, so shop managers on the reception desk, etc. We're reliant, of course, on local fundraising and donations for more than 80% of our income, And that income, of course, suffered significantly during the pandemic when fundraising activities couldn't be undertaken. We linked, of course, with other services across the network to discuss what was going on. But the Agile service redesign was probably the most important thing, really. So local guidance, we fairly quickly got out some care of the dying symptom control guidance, goals of care about communication and managing uncertainty, the care after death, which of course had all changed with the emergency legislation, positioning for patients with rapid tachypnea to improve their symptomatic relief, and a flowchart for oxygen use in the dying, which proved to be very interesting. We had to adapt specialist palliative care services locally. Inpatients, we continued to try and keep the inpatient unit flowing at all times, obviously keeping those with suspected COVID or proven COVID in side rooms. The day services, connect services, outpatient services all went virtual from day one. Telephone calls initially, Zoom then, and then after that it was Accurix consultations. And the things that were done as day services are now done as a range of activities into which people can dial for quizzes and talks and all the other things that Connect do. Queen's Court at Home was used to provide shifts of care to patients in their own homes, whether or not they had COVID, and to try and support those who had been transferred home from hospital following a rapid end-of-life transfer because they wished to be at home. The community palliative care team as an advisory service worked remotely from home initially to avoid them being together in one office, because conscious of a very small team, we didn't want to risk losing any more of them than we already had through various shielding, self-isolating and all the other things that go with it. Families very often didn't want to have any further footfall in the house, so lots of things were done by telephone at first, and then via Accurix, that opportunity for virtual consultations was very much taken up, surprisingly so in a population that's really very elderly, but are really very game to try technology, which is interesting. Of course, visits were done where necessary and continued, but we wanted to make sure we could try and continue to provide a 7-day service, which we have managed to do all the way through. The hospital palliative care team obviously ensured they visited all wards daily at both Southport and Ormskirk, taking face-to-face assessments as necessary, but trying to support staff who really needed it. Carer support changed from attendance at weekly carers groups to support by telephone initially and then video calls. And by the end of lockdown, carers were offered a new menu of activities delivered specifically by Zoom. Bereavement services continued as telephone or video consultations. The Transform team, who look after those patients who don't have specialist palliative care needs but are recognised as being GSF eligible, were really important in getting around the hospital constantly to see what was going on and to try and pick up problems where they were arising. And one member of the team was transferred purely to work with the care homes in developing anticipatory clinical management plans for COVID situations and non-COVID situations. And that was so successful that one of the geriatricians from the hospital actually came out into the community to work with her to do that. Education was important, and we carried on doing as much as we could, but online. The technological changes that were facilitated by the sort of can-do attitude which prevailed during the pandemic meant that the things that had been really difficult, in like remote desktops and getting System 1 other than a mobile version prior to COVID, suddenly all the blocks disappeared and we were able to have all the things that we needed, which was amazing. So education, for us, it was a really important part of this pandemic. We had 5 ECHO networks going. ECHO is Extended Community Health Outcomes, and it's a long story what ECHO is, but we had care homes, 3 lots of care homes, The South Sefton Care Homes, Kate Marley and her team were involved in educating, and then the others, we included district nurses and GPs, and we had weekly sessions throughout the first wave of the pandemic and had lots of attendances. And part of it was to keep them up to date with the literature and what was going on, and part of it was to actually give them a forum for discussing how they were managing, which was so successful that once the second wave started, they wanted to start the echoes again. So we're doing those now for care homes in this area. The online Zoom education, verification of death became really important. Syringe driver training online became really important. We did some training for GP registrars, district nurses, ACMPs, and care of dying. And then Claire Finnegan had quite a job teaching all the psychiatrists in Lancashire Care Foundation Trust about care of the dying, so to prepare them for looking after patients with COVID. And I'm sure she would have a lot to say about it if she had the chance. So point of care education was also important, whether that was in hospital or in the community, and every opportunity was taken to try and do that, and to try and count it as well, so we could see how much we were doing. So I've talked about the echo networks for the care homes, the anticipatory clinical management planning, which was crucial really to trying to keep people in their own homes and keep them where they needed to be. Out of the 178 clinical management plans that were produced within that 3-month period, that kept almost all of those residents in the care home, and that's helped enormously with hospital work. Specialist palliative care support that was also sent into the care homes, and the community nurses rang round each of the care homes each week to see how things were, what help they could give. We have a lot of care homes. Primary care and community, I've already talked about the things that we did there. And then when you come to the hospital, obviously there was the work that we would be doing generally as a specialist palliative care team and transform team, which was enhanced really by all the support that staff needed. We reinstituted the nurse verification of death policy in the hospital to improve how things were done. And I echoed Gwen and Claire's comments about redeployment experience. We had volunteers doing all sorts of things. We had all our physios and AHPs became the links between wards and families. So training and communication skills for them was helpful at the beginning. We opened an Oasis ward for patients who were dying from COVID fairly early on, and looked after nearly 60 people on that ward, and that was really helpful. I'll talk a bit more about that in a moment. And then we developed a volunteer bereavement support team to ring every family of patients who had died within the hospital during the period, to see whether how they were coping, how they felt about the experience, to offer them bereavement cards, memory boxes, to see what they wanted to do about the patient's property, whether they wanted clothes returned, because obviously the advice was not to return clothes at that time. And that bereavement team consisted of a retired consultant, an ophthalmologist, a urology nurse, and can't remember who the fourth one was, but it was a wide and varied team. So just quickly about the Oasis ward, because I think it's quite interesting what happened. So we had volunteers from all over the hospital who wanted to come and do shifts on Oasis, and lots of people sort of turned up to come and just spend time with patients, which was absolutely lovely. They were roughly half male and half female. The average age was 82, which is not surprising in our neck of the woods, ranging from 55 to 100 years, most white British, really reflecting the population that we have. Their comorbidities were multiple. So not surprisingly, we had over a third of people had dementia, over a third had diabetes, a third had some sort of hypertension, atrial fibrillation, heart disease. All of them either had a positive swab or a negative swab, but clinical changes consistent with COVID-19. Whoops, move. Out of those, 95% of them died, but actually 3 improved and were discharged back to their home or to the care home, which surprised lots of people. In terms of symptom management, I think along with lots of the literature that's been produced, we didn't find that symptom control was a major issue. I think the biggest symptom was exhausting rapid tachypnea, which often came in waves, but responded really well to positioning. Breathlessness, less than half required oxygen, and it was possible to reduce that oxygen requirement very frequently. Some were agitated. Pyrexia continued to death for half. We had much less in the way of trouble with respiratory tract secretions than we would have expected, and other symptoms were less of an issue. Delirium, which had been expected to be a problem, was a minor problem for us in this group of people. Family support was maintained both by telephone calls, Zoom, FaceTime and Skype. We actually had one patient who died on a Zoom call with the family, and the family were absolutely delighted that they had been able to be present at the time of death, although it was extremely emotional for the member of staff who was with them. In terms of visiting, 25% actually had visits from families, half into the ward and half to the window. And bereavement calls obviously were very important. Spiritual and religious needs, our chaplaincy teams were fantastic, and whether or not they had religious needs, all their spiritual needs were met in some way or another by the staff on the ward. So bereavement support, there were lots of positive and negative comments, but actually supporting this volunteer bereavement team was also very important, and they found it quite difficult taking all the calls that they did. The bereavement cards that the nurse, the patient at the time, wrote by hand saying, you know, I'm Sue, I was with Mary when she was dying, and this is the last thing that she said, or I was holding her hand, or whatever it was, were extremely popular with families because they had a little bit of something personal. And they were all offered a memory box, which was delivered by trust management team staff, which was very good of them. So what did we learn? We learnt that removing bureaucratic processes is really enabling. You know, saying to people, what do you think needs doing, and allowing them to do it is very important. Symptom control was achieved with usual measures. It wasn't difficult, but having a group of patients together in one place where we could learn very quickly and teach very quickly was also very helpful. Cohorting the dying together was helpful. It sounds awful, but actually it was a lovely ward. It was open. Patients felt secure because they could see staff, and where relatives were coming in, they felt very supported. Families really appreciated the conversations, and that bereavement support was crucial to pick up the problems early. Remote consultations have been really possible and welcomed in all parts of the service. We felt that education was not only knowledge building, but really supportive and confidence giving to all staff. We recognised how valuable our care homes were. They were able to do an enormous amount with support. And it was lovely to see how integrated services can be agile and really responsive. We are awaiting the bereavement tsunami, which is to come, and it's already started. I'm sure many of us have realised. But the second wave is very different. We've got lots and lots of patients. We've not only got the COVID-19 patients who are dying. We've got all those who are surfacing who did not have the attention that they needed during that COVID first wave, either because they didn't report symptoms and they were too frightened to go to hospital or GP, or their remote consultations did not uncover the things that they actually had. And that's plus the usual work. So I think we've got a weary workforce all over the place, plus the sickness, self-isolating childcare issues. There doesn't seem to be light at the end of the tunnel now, and this is a long haul. Our care home beds, which are 1.5% of the population, are a huge thing to support at the moment, and hospitals are still struggling with enormous numbers. But regular COVID testing and mass vaccination are both hopeful and another huge thing to have to encompass amongst everything else that's going on. One thing we must make sure is that on behalf of those for whom the cost was life itself, we mustn't waste this unique experience of the pandemic. We must make sure that we learn from it. Thank you.
Thank you, Karen, for that presentation, and to Gwen and Claire for their presentation. Fascinating and really thought-provoking, and great to hear about people's experiences and share. And I'm sure it's striking a chord with many of the people on this event today. We've got lots of comments and questions coming through the chat at the moment, and I think people are just kind of very struck by both presentations and clearly striking a chord. So